The heavy silence of the Denver Memorial Hospital corridor was broken only by the muffled sound of paws scratching the cold floor. The German Shepherd police dog stood motionless before the emergency room door, its ears drooping, its snout pressed against the narrow space between the door and the floor. No one could move it. "It's already 6 o'clock, Dr. Patterson murmured to the team gathered at the nursing station. "He hasn't eaten, hasn't drunk water. He's just waiting." The dog's name was Thor, a living legend of the Denver Police Department. 7 years of impeccable service, dozens of successful operations, countless lives saved. But now, his partner, Officer Marcus Thompson, was fighting for his life on the other side of that door. A shootout during a hostage rescue operation had left Marcus in critical condition. 3 bullets, one in the shoulder, one in the abdomen, and the worst of all, had pierced dangerously close to the heart. Thor was there when it all happened. "You witnessed your partner fall." He barked desperately while the paramedics worked, and when the ambulance drove off with Marcus unconscious, Thor had run after the vehicle for 4 blocks until another officer managed to stop him. Now, there he was, refusing to leave his post. "Someone needs to do something," said Nurse Janet, her eyes welling with tears. "I've never seen anything like this in 30 years of practice." That's when she appeared. Sarah Mitchell was only 26 years old and, in her second week as a night shift nurse at Memorial, her brown hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her blue eyes still held that idealistic glint of someone who had just graduated from college. She was walking down the hallway carrying a tray of medication when she saw the crowd gathered around the police dog. "What's going on?" he asked, approaching. "The canine of the officer who was shot," Janet explained. "It's been here for 6 hours. It won't leave at all." Sarah handed the tray into another nurse and slowly knelt a few feet from Thor. The dog didn't even move. His brown eyes remained fixed on the door, as if he could pierce through metal and wood with the intensity of his gaze alone. "Hey, warrior," Sarah whispered. "I know you're tired." "Nothing. I know you're scared." Thor's ears twitched slightly. Sarah took a deep breath. She had grown up on a small farm in Wyoming, surrounded by animals. Her father was a veterinarian, and she had spent her entire childhood learning that animals weren't so different from humans when it came to love and loss. "He knows you're here," Sarah continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I know he knows, and he wouldn't want to see you like this." Thor finally moved. He turned his head slowly towards Sarah, and what she saw in those eyes shattered her. It wasn't just canine loyalty, it was pain, it was love, it was the kind of connection that transcended species. Sarah slowly extended her hand, and Thor sniffed her fingers. Then, to everyone's surprise, he allowed her to touch his head. "Good boy," Sarah whispered. "Very good boy." "How did you do that?" asked Dr. Patterson, impressed. "Animals recognize kind souls," Sarah replied simply, stroking Thor's ears. "And broken souls, too." The revelation. It was Janet who noticed first. As Sarah moved to sit next to Thor, the sleeve of her uniform rode up slightly, revealing something on her left forearm. A tattoo. "Sarah," Janet said slowly. "That tattoo." Sarah looked at her own arm and smiled sadly. "Yeah, I know. It's not exactly the kind of thing you expect to see in a newly graduated nurse, is it?" But it wasn't the existence of the tattoo that had caught attention. It was the design. A perfectly detailed dog paw print with the initials KM intertwined in the center and a date, September 18th, 2019. "Dr. Patterson," Janet called urgently, "you need to see this." The doctor approached, followed by other members of the team. They all looked at Sarah's tattoo, and then at the emergency room door where Marcus was fighting for his life. "It can't be a coincidence," someone murmured. Sarah noticed the confusion and curiosity on the faces around her. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength to tell a story she rarely shared. "Kyle Mitchell," she began, her voice steady despite the visible emotion. "My older brother. He was a K-9 officer too. Not here in Denver, but in Boulder." The hallway became even quieter. "He and his A partner, a Belgian shepherd named Ranger, responded to a domestic violence call in September 2019. An armed man, completely out of control. Sarah gently stroked Thor as she spoke. Ranger went in first, as he was trained to do. The man shot. Ranger didn't survive. Tears began to roll down Sarah's face, but she continued. Kyle went in right after. He managed to disarm the man and save the woman and the 2 children who were being held hostage, but in the process, she swallowed hard. He was shot 3 times. He survived the initial surgeries. I was finishing my nursing degree when it happened. I spent weeks by his side in the hospital. Thor had turned completely to Sarah now, as if he understood every word. Kyle recovered physically, Sarah continued, but losing Ranger destroyed something in him. They had been partners for 5 years. They lived together, worked together, trusted each other with their lives. And when Ranger died protecting him, she shook her head. Kyle was never the same again. What happened to him? Janet asked gently. He left the police force. He said he couldn't do it without Ranger. Now he works as a service dog trainer for veterans with PTSD. Sarah smiled through her tears. He found a way to honor Ranger by helping others. And the tattoo? Asked Dr. Patterson. I did it on the 1st anniversary of Ranger's death, to remember his sacrifice, to remind Kyle that love, that partnership, was worth every second, even if it ended in pain. Sarah looked directly at Thor. Police dogs aren't just tools. They're heroes. They're family. It was at that moment that Sarah truly understood the magnitude of what was happening. Marcus, she said suddenly, the officer who was shot, he and Thor, partners for 7 years, Janet confirmed, the most decorated members of the K9 unit. Sarah felt her heart clench. She knew that connection. She'd seen it in Kyle and Ranger, and now she was seeing it in Thor, an incredibly loyal warrior refusing to abandon his best friend. How is Marcus? Sarah asked, addressing Dr. Patterson. The doctor hesitated. Critical but stable. The next few hours are crucial. If he survives the night, he's going to survive, Sarah said with a conviction that surprised even herself. She looked at Thor. Because he has a reason to fight. A furry, 4-legged reason that won't give up on him. Sarah sat there on the cold hospital floor beside Thor for over an hour. She talked to him about Kyle, about Ranger, about the kind of love that exists between an officer and their K9 partner. She talked about loyalty and courage and how sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply keep breathing. And Thor listened. Every word. At 3 in the morning, something changed. The emergency room door opened and a surgical nurse emerged, tired but smiling. He's stabilized, she announced. Marcus woke up briefly. He's asking about... She looked down and saw Thor. About him. Thor stood up instantly, alert, every muscle in his body tense. Can I take him to see Marcus? Sarah asked. Just for a minute? Dr. Patterson glanced at the regulations on the wall, then at Thor, then at Sarah. Officially no, he said. But, he smiled, I guess I might not have seen a service dog enter the recovery room by 60 seconds. Sarah gently held Thor by the leash. Come on, boy. Let's go see your human. The room was darkened, illuminated only by the softly glowing monitors. Marcus was pale, connected to various tubes and wires, but his eyes were open. And when Thor entered, those eyes filled with tears. Thor, Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse. Thor moved forward cautiously, as if he knew he needed to be gentle. He placed his head on the bed next to Marcus's hand, and the officer managed to lift his fingers just enough to touch his partner's fur. Good boy, Marcus murmured. Very good boy. Sarah watched from the doorway, her own vision blurred by tears. It was like watching Kyle and Ranger one more time, that inexplicable connection, that unconditional love. 60 seconds are up, she said gently after a moment, but not before approaching the bed. Officer Thompson, I'm Sarah. I'll be looking after you tonight. Thank you, Marcus said, his eyes closing in exhaustion, for taking care of him too. It's an honor, Sarah replied sincerely. When she led Thor back into the hallway, the dog was different. Still alert, still protective, but no longer desperate. He had seen his human. He knew Marcus was alive. Sarah led him to a waiting area where she had managed to get some water and rations that one of the officers had brought. Thor drank eagerly and ate a little, his eyes never leaving the direction of the room where Marcus was. "You're going to be okay," Sarah said, kneeling beside him once more. "You both will be." That's when she noticed something. Thor was looking at her tattoo. Slowly, hesitantly, Sarah extended her arm. Thor sniffed the tattooed paw, then looked at Sarah with something that could only be described as understanding. "You feel it, don't you?" Sarah whispered. "You know I understand." Thor placed his paw on Sarah's hand, and in that moment, a connection was formed. It didn't replace Marcus and Thor. It didn't replace Kyle and Ranger. But it was something special in itself. The recognition of a soul that understood loss, love, and the incredible courage to keep going. In the following weeks, while Marcus recovered, Sarah became a constant presence. The hospital had made an exception, allowing Thor to visit daily, and Sarah was always there during these visits, facilitating the reunion, ensuring that both the officer and his partner received the care they deserved. Marcus learned about Sarah, Kyle, and Ranger's story, and on a sunny afternoon, already able to sit up in bed, he asked to see the tattoo up close. "It's beautiful," he said, delicately tracing the outline of the paw with his finger. "Ranger was a hero." "Like Thor," Sarah replied. "Like you. I don't feel like a hero," Marcus admitted. "I feel lucky to have survived, lucky to still have my partner." Kyle said something similar, Sarah shared. "But I always tell him, surviving when it would be easier to give up, that's heroism too." It was Sarah who was in the room when the doctors discharged Marcus. 6 weeks after the shooting, he was ready to go home. Thor, who had waited patiently for that day, was practically vibrating with excitement. "Ready?" Sarah asked, helping Marcus with the wheelchair he would need for a few more weeks. "More than ready," Marcus smiled. Then he hesitated. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you for everything." "No need to thank me," she said. "It was an honor to meet you both." "No," Marcus insisted. "You saved not only me, but him too. That first night when no one could reach him, you made all the difference." Sarah knelt down to pet Thor one last time. He just needed to know that someone understood. Marcus looked at the tattoo on Sarah's arm, now familiar. "Have you ever thought about going back to Boulder, working with Kyle and the service dogs?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Actually, no." "Why?" "Because you have a gift," Marcus said simply, "and because I think there are more dogs and officers out there who could benefit from it." The words stayed with Sarah long after Marcus and Thor left the hospital. She reflected on her journey, the loss of Ranger, Kyle's suffering, the connection with Thor, the privilege of helping Marcus recover. Perhaps there was something bigger there, a purpose she hadn't yet fully considered. 3 months later, Sarah made a call. "Kyle, it's Sarah. I have a question for you about the service dog program." Back in Denver, Marcus had returned to light work, and Thor was by his side as always. But once a month, without fail, they visited the memorial. Not as patients, but as friends. And every time, Sarah was there to greet them, with stories about the new dogs she was helping to train, about officers recovering, about the difference that 6-hour night had made in her life. Thor always sniffed her tattoo. He always placed his paw on her hand, as if to say, "I remember, I understand, thank you." And Marcus would always watch with a smile, knowing he had witnessed something rare. The moment when 3 lost souls met in a hospital corridor and discovered they weren't so alone. After all, Sarah's tattoo eventually gained company. On the other side of her arm, she added another leg, this one with the initials MT and T, and the date April 15, 2024. The day she learned that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes heroes have 4 paws and a heart bigger than any human could imagine. Because in the end, it didn't matter if you were a wounded officer fighting for your life, a loyal dog refusing to abandon its partner, or a young nurse carrying the pain of past losses. What mattered was finding connection in the darkness. It was recognizing each other's pain and deciding it was worth continuing. It was about love, pure, unconditional, impossible to break. And sometimes, just sometimes, that love came with a paw print tattoo and a story that changed lives forever. The auditorium at the Denver Police Academy was packed. Officers from across the state had gathered for the annual Merit Award ceremony, but this year there was something special in the air. Sarah Mitchell, now 31 and director of the Colorado K-9 Official Integrated Recovery Program, adjusted the microphone on the podium. Beside her, Marcus Thompson stood, his uniform impeccable, several new medals gleaming on his chest. And at Marcus's feet, already 12 years old, but still dignified and alert, was Thor. "Good afternoon, everyone," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. "I'm here today to talk about a night that changed my life, a night that taught me that healing doesn't always come from medicine or medical procedures. Sometimes it comes from connection, from loyalty, from unconditional love." She told the story, the whole thing. Thor's 6-hour vigil, the tattoo reveal, Kyle and Ranger, the journey that took her from an insecure rookie nurse to someone dedicated to helping officers and their K-9 partners through the most difficult times. "Since that night," Sarah continued, "our program has helped 47 K-9 officer pairs through recovery from injuries, psychological trauma, and loss. We've created hospital protocols that recognize police dogs not as equipment, but as family. And it all started because a German Shepherd refused to give up." The audience applauded, but Sarah raised her hand. "But I'm not here alone. Officer Thompson, would you like to say a few words?" Marcus approached the microphone, Thor moving in perfect sync with him. Even after partial retirement and a shift to administrative and training roles, the pair remained inseparable. "That night, 5 years ago," Marcus began, his voice emotional, "I was ready to give up. The pain was too much. The fear of never being the same again, of never being able to work with my partner again. It seemed easier to simply let go." He looked down at Thor, who looked back with those intelligent brown eyes. "But Thor didn't leave me, and Sarah didn't leave us. She saw something that night that few would recognize, that the connection between an officer and their K-9 isn't just professional, it's existential. It's the kind of bond that keeps us alive when everything else fails." Marcus paused, reaching for something in his pocket. "Sarah, you changed not only my life, but the entire system. Because of your work, injured officers can now have their partners by their side during recovery. Dogs who have lost their officers receive the psychological support they need. And entire families, because yes, our dogs are family, are treated with the dignity they deserve." He handed Sarah a small box. "This is from the Denver K-9 unit, but also from all the other units in the state that have been impacted by your program." With trembling hands, Sarah opened the box. Inside was a medal, not an official police medal, but something created especially for her. The image of a dog and an officer side by side with the words, "Guardian of Guardians." "There are no words," Sarah whispered, tears streaming freely down her face. "Then let me finish with this," Marcus said, his own voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for seeing us when we were invisible, for understanding us when no one else could, for turning the worst night of my life into something that saved countless others." The audience rose to their feet, applause echoing through the auditorium, but Sarah could barely hear through her emotions. She knelt, and Thor, dear, loyal, incredibly special Thor, walked over to her and rested his head on her shoulder. "I love you too, boy," she whispered in his furry ear. That evening, after the ceremony, a small group gathered in a nearby park. Marcus and Thor, of course, Sarah, and a special surprise that Sarah had arranged. Kyle had driven from Boulder with his own team, 3 service dogs he was actively training, and their respective seniors. "Little sister," Kyle said, pulling Sarah into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you." "I learned from the best," Sarah replied, squeezing him back. They watched as the dogs interacted, Thor, still the gentleman, allowing the younger ones to play around him while keeping a watchful eye on Marcus, who chatted animatedly with the veterans about training techniques. "You know," Kyle said thoughtfully, "I truly believed that losing Ranger was the end of my story, that I would never find purpose again." "And now?" Sarah asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Now I know Ranger wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger." Kyle watched his service dogs working with their humans, saw the peace in the faces of the veterans who had struggled with PTSD and now had companions who understood. "He led me here, to this job, to these lives we're changing." Sarah smiled, touching the medal that was still hanging around her neck. "Funny how it works, isn't it? The worst things that happen to us sometimes lead us to the most important places." "Do you think Ranger and Thor know?" Kyle asked. "The impact they had?" "I think so," Sarah replied, watching Thor gaze fondly at Marcus. "I think they always knew. Animals understand purpose in a way that takes us humans years to learn." The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Sarah looked at her tattoo, now complemented by several other paw prints, each representing a special case, a pair that had touched her heart, a story of resilience and love. But that first leg, KM Ranger, September 18th, 2019, was still the most special. And the second, MT&T, April 15th, 2024, was the one that had changed everything. "Sarah!" Marcus called, gesturing to her. "Thor wants to show you something." She walked over to them, curious. Thor was sitting in a position of perfect attention, but there was something different in his eyes, a mischievousness, a joy. "Show her, kid," Marcus encouraged. Thor lifted his right paw and gently placed it on Sarah's arm, right over the tattoo that represented him and Marcus. And Sarah would swear by this until her dying day. Thor inclined his head and seemed to be smiling. "He remembers," Marcus said softly. "Every time. The night you sat with him for 6 hours, the moment you showed him that someone understood." "How could I forget?" Sarah replied, stroking Thor's head with her free hand. "You two saved me as much as I saved you." And there, in that park at sunset, surrounded by service dogs and the humans who loved her, Sarah understood a fundamental truth. We don't choose our purpose. It chooses us, often in our darkest moments, through the most unlikely connections. A new nurse with a tattoo, a police dog refusing to abandon its partner. 6 hours that turned into 5 years of systemic change. And all because someone stopped to look, to truly see, to understand that behind every uniform, every emblem, every pair of eyes, human or canine, lies a story of love, sacrifice, and unbreakable courage. Thor barked once, loud and clear, a bark of joy, of satisfaction, of a warrior who had fought his battles and found peace. And Sarah, with tears of happiness streaming down her face, knew that this was exactly where she should be. Home was not a place, it was a purpose. It was knowing that you made a difference in someone's life, human or not, and she had found hers.